because it's on the rise, according to what the experts are saying. The World Health Organization has talked about this a lot. And with me in studio, I have Jane Gacheru, who is a counseling psychologist, to help us understand all matters depression, how to overcome depression, and the signs of depression, which are really not easy to tell. Jane Gacheru, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for making time. I would have shaken your hand, but you know, social distancing.
Understood.
You know, Jane, I've done very many stories on depression over the years, and depression seems to be an issue that is recurrent. Previously, we were talking about women being predisposed to depression more than the men. Now we're even hearing cases of men becoming, you know, the people who we can say depression is being found amongst the population of men in the country, especially Kenyan men. But over and above that, I just want us to understand, what is depression?
Well, layered depression is a state of what we call basically a depressed mood, meaning that most of the time, more often than not, the individual sort of experiences a lot of sadness. It comes with mood swings to an extent that even it hampers an individual's energy, even the ability to move around. You can basically see it even reflected in terms of their appearance. The person will slow down, become more fatigued than usual. You can even tell maybe by even how they will oversleep as a result. So when we talk about someone being depressed, it means that this is a mental illness that actually depresses your mental functions as well as your physical functions. So you can see it because of the mood, you know, being, when we say a depressed mood, then it means that it is low. Yes.
So I hear you talking about depression, but what you're talking to me about now sounds like the signs of depression. Let's go further into that. Most of the articles, you know, even looking at what the World Health Organization talks about in relation to depression, is not something that you can actually look at someone most times and tell, oh, the person is depressed. Because even like some of the articles I've read, someone can be laughing, jumping up and down, you know, energetic, but they're depressed. So when we talk about signs of depression, what do we look out for?
Well, some of the most common signs are some form of irritability. There are some people who become highly irritable when they are depressed. So it may not be all the time, but if you watch someone keenly, then you can always tell when there is a change in personality. They get irritable over very small things. Then you will notice a sudden weight gain or weight loss that is unexplainable. Like maybe someone was let's say 60 kgs last week, and this week they weigh 50. You see, that's a bit, you know, it's a bit extreme. You don't lose such weight, that much weight within a very short period of time, especially not when you cannot explain it. If you're exercising, you're on diet, okay, but when you're not, then that tells you there is something wrong. Some people also tend to oversleep, or some people have insomnia. So it can be both ways. So you will notice maybe this person was previously just sleeping normal hours, and then all of a sudden they can sleep through the entire day. Or another person will not have any sleep at all. Maybe they'll keep on waking up at night. There is also the sadness that I was talking about. So sadness to an extent that the person may even cry. The difference why you're saying that some people could be even laughing, you know, we have different personality types. There are people who are basically bubbly by nature, and the people who are more bubbly than others tend to sort of have a way of masking their pain. And so because of this, you may not notice the sadness. But if you're keen to look at the other symptoms, then you will see. Another symptom, and of course this now you can only tell by the individual talking about it, is the person becomes, starts talking about death and even thinking about death. You know, they will make subtle comments like, hey, by the way, I wouldn't mind going right now. You know, there's nothing left for me in this world. So that also communicates some sort of hopelessness and worthlessness, a feeling of worthlessness in the individual. And eventually, depending on who we are talking about, it can lead to suicidal ideation, whereby the person now begins to even fantasize about committing suicide. So all these are now some of the most prominent symptoms of depression.
And what is usually the cause of depression?
We have a lot of factors, but the major factor, the chief factor, is stress. Now, the difference is that some of us are more vulnerable to stress than others. So we have some individuals who maybe because of their personality types, they are more predisposed to get depression even under the same circumstances as another person. So most of the time when people are exposed to very stressful situations, I'll give examples of, for example, dysfunctional marriages, children in dysfunctional families. We have people facing extreme conditions, maybe like working conditions, maybe business failure. All these are things that can, in the long run, lead to depression, depending on the individual's ability to cope with the situation.
Now, when we talk about men, you know, men have a way of hiding their emotions. And sometimes you might mistake the silence of a man for someone who's just maybe reflecting. How do you tell when a man is depressed?
So men now, you remember the irritability that I was talking to you about. Most men tend to, for most of their feelings, they tend to substitute most of their emotions with anger. And so irritability is highly observable in children and the male gender when they are depressed. But even the other symptoms apply, like maybe a loss of energy and a loss of interest in activities that were previously interesting to them. So say, for example, you have a man who previously used to enjoy a certain TV shows, like maybe a documentary, and then all of a sudden this person has totally lost interest in whatever it is that they were interested in. Another thing is also a loss of interest in sex as well. Because sex is meant for pleasure. So anything pleasurable, you tend to see the individual's interests now going down on what they previously enjoyed. That is also a pointer that when I can't enjoy anything in my life that I previously found interesting, it's like I'm losing now I have lost the will to live. Yes.
Let's talk about women. Because women also go through a lot of pressure from motherhood, juggling jobs, like you mentioned. Sometimes stress is a major factor when it comes to people boiling down to getting depressed. So for women, how can someone tell when a woman is actually depressed?
Women now tend to cry most of the times because, of course, our emotional nature. So women, their feelings of sadness tend to result to crying. And because we are able to express our emotions more than the male gender, I think that is why now the crying helps. When someone starts crying for no reason all the time, they burst into tears for what you would probably call nothing to cry over, then that should be, it should be a sign of an alarm. Also, the other symptoms that you were talking about, there are some people who even wake up maybe on a particular day and you find that they have no will to do anything. Now, if, for example, you have, in this case, a woman who has children, and especially very young children, but then they have even lost their interest in nurturing those children, then that tells you something. It's the same case like if you have someone suffering from postpartum depression, mostly you notice that they're not even interested in their child's needs, whereas a mother is usually very nurturing and responsive. So this withdrawal, by the way, is also another major sign. Withdrawing and isolation from the other world. As women, we have a lot of responsibilities, especially around the home. You become the nurturer. You have to take care of the kids, your husband. And so when you find a woman actually withdrawing from what she normally, all these people who are depending on her, then that tells you there actually could be something that is wrong.
I know that other than even the adults who are affected, like you've mentioned, there's also young people, the youth. And depression is said to be very, very common amongst the youth, and it's actually on the rise. What are some of the ways to point out? For parents, a parent wants to know if their child is okay. So how do you point out, what are some of the things to look out for, especially amongst the youth, as far as depression or suicidal tendencies are concerned?
So mostly withdrawal is if the person has become all of a sudden withdrawn, then that should be cause for worry. Withdrawal and isolating themselves. Again, the high irritability that we were talking about. Because of this change in mood that takes place when someone is depressed, most teenagers tend to get highly irritable. So they will respond in a certain way. They'll probably blow up under circumstances that they previously did not. There is also a certain preoccupation with maybe social media and TV that is also abnormal. Like if you are constantly, this child or teenager is constantly watching movies the entire night, they do that a whole day, that is cause for worry, because not only is it a sign, but that over-absorption and addiction to TV and social media has also been found to be, again, a contributing factor to depression. And the worrying fact about it is that the people who are depressed tend to still try and quench that hopelessness and feeling of helplessness using the very same means again, which is now the addiction to TV and social media that we are talking about. Yes, and then with suicidal ideation, mostly some teenagers will communicate, although they may say it in a manner that like it's out of spite. But it's important as a parent to pay attention to that. When someone starts talking about committing suicide, then take it seriously, because this person could actually be serious. So let her go and get checked by a mental health professional just to establish the seriousness of the issue. If it is not communicated, suicidal ideation will usually take the form of, again, the withdrawal that I was talking about, but usually even some attempts at self-harm. I have had teenagers who tell me that they have even they have been slashing their wrists and their parents have not noticed. So really paying attention to what your child is doing behind the closed doors is also very important.
Let's talk a little bit more about the young people. What are some of the causes, other than social media and the pressure of peer pressure and whatnot, when it comes to issues at home? What are we looking at? Some of the things you've heard from some of the teenagers that you're working with, or even the youth.
With the youth, let me talk about the teenagers and then maybe the older youth above the age of 18. For most teenagers, it's usually that navigating, it's an identity, there's an identity crisis around that age. So navigating that change in their lives can be difficult, especially without the support of parents. So most teenagers tend to find their way around these situations, and because of that, it can lead to frustration. And then, of course, having the suicidal ideation. Then we have the teenagers who live within dysfunctional families. So that again can be a source of trouble, where we have maybe there is violence in the family. The parents are fighting, there is physical violence. There could be emotional abuse, whereby this emotional abuse is either meted out on them or they observe it being meted out on a parent. Again, that can be a cause of worry for them, and eventually also leading to suicidal ideation. But I think the one that I have found that is most common with the youth in this age group is the fact that they are saying that their parents are not available for them, like their parents are too busy for them. So they would like to get more attention from their parents, but because, remember, this is someone who's transitioning from childhood to adulthood, their communication skills do not allow them to be able to speak up, or rather to talk about this clearly with the parents. And so most of them end up having their needs unmet by the parents. So this feeling, this gap that is left by parents, most of them will try to fill it with toxic relationships, drinking, drugs, and so on and so forth.
We have a caller, Jane, and this is Quinta from Nairobi. We want to hear what Quinta has to say. Hello, Quinta? Unfortunately, we seem to have lost the caller. But the question now would be, Jane, can someone recover from depression?
Yes, you can. Just like any other, of course, we have some mental illnesses that are more serious than others. With depression, you can recover. Number one of the things that are very important is, of course, to seek help when you realize that there's a person suffering from depression, or you yourself are suffering from depression. Most of the time, even as the person is probably getting help, either through medication and counseling, it's important also for the person to exercise, which is usually a huge challenge for people who are depressed. They don't like moving around, and it's because most of the time depression leads to sort of like a slowing down of your body. So most of them will report feeling fatigued and tired most of the time. But it's important to encourage them to move around a bit and not just to move around, but also to try out different things that they can pass their time with. Maybe gardening, if you have a small area where this person can plant something, it's usually very therapeutic to see something grow. Maybe also having them engage in other activities that they can enjoy little by little as they try and get, they try and get their groove back, so to speak, or try and get back to their normal selves. But yes, medication helps. There is therapy in the form of counseling, and then there is, of course, engaging, make sure the person gets to do something they love, and then also a lot of exercise also is helpful.
Let's finally wind up with the youth. You mentioned that some of them come from very dysfunctional families. And of course, I mean, if that's where they come from, then there's a possibility they may not be able to run away. For some, perhaps, they decide to run away. I've hosted different people who have gone into drug abuse. Most of them talk about troubled homes. Most of them also talk about going into depression and so resorting to drug abuse and whatnot. To avoid all these things, what do you think we need to do as a nation and society to make sure we help address the issues back at home for those young people who have no choice but staying where there is dysfunction?
Number one, I think there's a huge gap in as far as parenting is concerned. And majorly because maybe our nation is just getting used to this new thing of, like having, should I call it, being in counseling, we call it psychoeducation, whereby we train people on certain skills. And we are not saying it's because people don't know how to parent. No, it's just because naturally we tend to take over from where our parents left off. Like, you parent the same way you are parented. And most of the time, that parenting is not viable in the current times that we are living in. So one, I think it's important for parents to go for parenting workshops or seminars whenever someone hears there is one around them, that please do not ignore. For the sake of your children, there's a lot that you will learn there about yourself, because mostly you find that parents tend to met out on their children the bitterness and the anger that they carry within themselves. So when you are you're not self-aware, then that means you're injuring your child without knowing. So those parenting classes are helpful in the sense that not only do you get to understand yourself, you get to understand your children according to their different personality types, and so you are able to treat them differently. You can tell their abilities, their skills, their talents. You can tell probably their strengths and limitations, and so you are able to support them even better. Because also another thing that has happened in the current world is because we have both parents working, then people have a very short time that they spend with their children every day. In fact, if you talk to most of the youth who are in boarding schools, they will tell you, my mother doesn't know me, or my father doesn't know who I am. So that tells you these people are strangers living in the same home.
So there's an issue of parenting, and there's actually classes that parents can pursue. Thank you so much, Jane Gacheru, for making time. I would love to have you here for one whole hour. We talk about depression, and I hope that in the future we'll have you again to talk more about depression and suicide, because I think it's a very important conversation that we need to continue having as a country. Thank you for making time.
Thank you for having me as well.
All right. Well, that has been Jane Gacheru, who is a counseling psychologist, talking to us about depression.